Excuse me, she finally managed, her voice trembling. Professor Fidelis looked at her without flinching. Yes, Jane, you heard correctly. For the sake of understanding reproductive biology, I need you to remove your undies. It's essential for the demonstration. Jane glanced around, hoping someone would speak up or defend her. But everyone...
my heart beats, a lady of all men's dreams.
Jane, I need you to remove your pants. It's for today's lesson on human reproduction. Jane sat in her biology class, feeling the usual mix of focus and boredom. Professor Fidelis was lecturing on human anatomy, and though his tone was serious, Jane found herself zoning out, thinking about her weekends. But her mind snapped back as Professor Fidelis looked straight at her. Jane, for today's demonstration on human reproduction, he began, his voice calm but strangely intense. I need you to remove your undergarments. The words didn't register at first. She blinked, certain she misheard him. Her classmates grew silent, turning their heads towards her. Jane's face flushed and her heart began pounding. She tried to speak, but her throat felt tight. Excuse me, she finally managed, her voice trembling. Professor Fidelis looked at her without flinching. Yes, Jane, you heard correctly. For the sake of understanding reproductive biology, I need you to remove your undies. It's essential for the demonstration. Jane glanced around, hoping someone would speak up or defend her. But everyone seemed just as shocked, frozen in place. Her best friend Lily, who was sitting across the room, stared with wide eyes, as if silently urging Jane to stand up and leave. I don't think that's necessary, Professor, Jane stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. His gaze hardened and his tone grew cold. If you are unwilling to participate, Jane, you are free to leave the class immediately. However, it will affect your grade. Be sure about that. This is part of the learning experience. Jane's eyes darted to the door. Her palms were sweaty, and she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. After a moment of hesitation, she gathered her things and bolted from the room, heading down. Her heart was racing. Once she was out in the hallway, Jane leaned against the wall, her whole body shaking. What just happened? She thought, trying to process the mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief that shone inside her. A moment later, Lily appeared by her side, her face pale and worried. Jane, are you okay? Jane shook her head, barely able to find her voice. He actually asked me to do that. Can you imagine that? In front of everyone. Why would he think that's okay to do? Lily placed a comforting hand on Jane's shoulder. Jane, that's absolutely not normal. He can't ask you to do something like that. You have to report him, you know that. A wave of doubt washed over Jane. But he's respected, Lily. Everyone thinks he's brilliant. Who is going to believe me? Jane, Lily said firmly, what he did was wrong. Respected or not, he doesn't have the right to make you feel like that. You need to talk to someone. Jane nodded, though uncertainty lingered. Part of her wondered if she was somehow misunderstood, but another part of her knew that her instincts were right. She felt humiliated, and she knew she couldn't let it slide. The next day, Jane gathered her courage and headed to the office of Dr. Lawson, the Dean of Student Affairs. She felt nervous, her hand trembling as she knocked on his door. Dr. Lawson, a kind-looking man with glasses and a gentle expression, welcomed her in. Jane, what brings you here today? He asked, gesturing for her to take a seat. Jane hesitated, then began to recount what had happened in the class. She explained the professor's request, the uncomfortable silence, and how she felt trapped. Dr. Lawson listened carefully, his expression turning serious as Jane spoke. When she finished, he leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Jane, This is a very serious matter. Professor Fidelis has been with us for a very long time, and he has an excellent record. Are you sure there wasn't some kind of misunderstanding?" Jane's stomach twisted. "I know what I heard, Dr. Lawson. He asked me to pull my undies in front of the whole class. I felt humiliated." Dr. Lawson nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming forward, Jane. We'll begin an investigation. But please understand this process may be difficult, and you may have to repeat your story several times." Jane nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. She was glad she'd spoken up, but a part of her was scared about what might happen next. Word spread quickly around campus, and it wasn't long before Jane felt the weight of everyone's whispers and stares. As she walked through the hallways, she could hear students murmuring, some sympathetic, others doubtful. "Did you hear about Jane? She reported Professor Fidelis." One student whispered. "Are you serious?" I thought he was such a good professor," another replied. "Maybe she's just misunderstood him." The doubts and judgments were painful. Jane began to feel isolated, as if people saw her as a troublemaker rather than someone seeking justice. Even some of her friends seemed to avoid her, and though Lily stayed by her side, Jane could sense the tension it created. One afternoon, as they sat in the cafeteria, Jane sighed, staring at her untouched lunch. "I feel like everyone turned against me, Lily." Lily reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm here for you, Jane, and I know you did the right thing. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Jane managed a small smile, grateful for her friend's support, but the isolation weighed on her, and each day felt lonelier than the last. Later that night, unable to sleep, Jane found herself scrolling through online forums related to her university. She was desperate to find any hint that she wasn't alone. As she searched, she stumbled upon a post from several years ago about a professor who had faced similar accusations at a different college. Her heart raced as she read. The professor had been dismissed, but the case was kept quiet and no charges were filed. Jane couldn't shake the feeling that there might be a connection. Could it be Professor Fidelis? Determined to find out, Jane reached out to a former student from that college, Rebecca, who agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. Sitting across from Jane in a quiet cafe, Rebecca looked nervous, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear them. "Look, I don't want to get too involved," Rebecca said softly, "but you are not the first. He's done this kind of thing before. There were rumors, stories, but nobody wanted to listen. And those who did, they were just told to move on." Jane felt a surge of anger. "So he's been getting away with this for years," Rebecca nodded. "I dropped his class because of something he said to me. At the time, I thought I was overreacting. But hearing your story, it makes me realize I wasn't alone." Feeling stronger, Jane decided to reach out to others who had taken Professor Fidelis' class. She posted on a student forum, carefully phrasing her message to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar. The response was overwhelming. Several students reached out to her, sharing their own stories of discomfort and strange requests in his class. One message in particular stood out. "Hey Jane, he didn't just ask me to pull my undies. He did a lot of things to me that I can't bring myself to stay here. I was too scared to report him. You are not alone." With each story, Jane felt more validated. She wasn't just standing up for herself, she was giving a voice to others who had felt silenced by fear. Mr. Tony, an old professor in the biology department, heard about Jane's case and approached her. "Jane, I've suspected Professor Fidelis of crossing boundaries for a while now. If you need someone to back you up, I'm here for you." A formal hearing was finally arranged, and Jane, along with other students and Mr. Tony, gathered to share their experience. Professor Fidelis sat across from them, his face a mask of calm confidence. But as one student after another stood up to speak, his expression began to shift. A former student named Lisa, now a graduate, took the stand, her voice trembling. I dropped his class 3 years ago because of similar incident. He didn't just ask me to pull my undies. He did so many things to me that I can't bring myself to start saying here. He took advantage of me, and most of all, he failed me for his cause, for not doing a lot of things he asked me to do, she confessed. At the time, I thought I was overreacting, but hearing Jane's story made me realize I wasn't alone. The dean looked serious, his face somber as the testimony mounted. He turned to Professor Fidelis, who now appeared visibly shaking, his confident facade beginning to crack. Professor Fidelis, the dean said firmly, these accounts raise serious concern about your teaching method and behavior. Your role is to educate, but also to create a safe learning environment. This investigation is being taken very seriously. Fidelis turned red, trying to defend himself. These accusations are baseless. I am a respected professor. These students are simply misunderstanding my method. But the dean shook his head. This isn't about misunderstanding, Professor. This is about an abuse of authority. After hours of deliberation, the board reached a decision. Professor Fidelis will be dismissed, effective immediately, and the university issued a statement condemning his actions. They pledged to implement stronger policies to protect students and ensure a safe environment. As Jane left the hearing room, a wave of emotions washed over her. Relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sadness. She had fought hard to have her voice heard. And now, at last, justice had been served. Professor Fidelis was finally being held accountable for his actions. But the victory felt bittersweet. She knew her life on campus would never be the same. Outside, a few students stood waiting. Some looked at her with admiration, others with pity, and a few with resentment, as if they blamed her for ruining his career. Lily was there, waiting with a proud smile. She wrapped her arms around Jane in a warm hug. You did it, Jane. You stood up for yourself, for all of us, Jane nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, Lily. There were times I thought I was going crazy, but you always believed me. They walked together, leaving the administrative building behind. Students passing by gave Jane mixed reactions. Some nodded respectively, while others averted their eyes or whispered as they walked past. But Jane held her head high. She knew she'd done the right thing, and that knowledge gave her strength. In the following weeks, the university implemented new policies, introducing support systems to encourage students to report any form of misconduct without fear of retaliation. Jane became an advocate on campus, speaking at student events about her experience, emphasizing the importance of trusting one's instincts and standing up against inappropriate behavior. One day, as Jane was heading to class, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a young freshman looking nervous yet determined. "Hi, Jane," the girl said softly, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story gave me the courage to speak up about something I didn't feel comfortable with. You've helped me feel safer here." Jane felt her heart swell with gratitude and pride. She smiled warmly, her voice filled with encouragement. "Thank you for telling me. Remember, you are never alone in this. There will always be people who will stand by you." The freshman nodded, her eyes glistening with admiration. "You've made a real difference, Jane. We all feel it." As Jane continued her day, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. Her experience, though painful, had become a source of strength, not just for herself, but for others around her. She was no longer the quiet student who stayed out of trouble. She was now a voice for those who hadn't been heard, a symbol of resilience and courage. Sitting alone on the campus garden one afternoon, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought back to the days she had walked out of that biology class, humiliated and scared. At the time, she had felt so isolated, uncertain if anyone would understand or believe her. But now, as she looked around the campus, she saw faces that had been touched by her story, Faces that felt stronger, braver, because she had dared to speak up. She had gone through pain and judgment, but in the end, she had found her voice. Taking out her notebook, she began to jot down thoughts, intending to share them with others at an upcoming student event. She wanted to remind them that courage often meant standing alone, facing judgment and challenging authority, and she wanted to leave them with a message that she had learned through her journey. Never let fear silence your voice. Speaking up is never easy, but sometimes it's the most powerful thing you can do. As Jane's story comes to an end, here is a question for you, my beautiful viewers. What would you have done if you were in Jane's position? Would you have found the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the stakes were high? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, eye-opening stories. Let Jane's journey remind us all that standing up for ourselves and others is never easy, but is a choice that can create change and protect others from harm. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.